What if the changes you didn't plan weren't mistakes at all? What if the sudden shifts, the quiet redirections, and the moments that no longer made sense weren't signs of disorder, but signs of design? If you're listening right now, something inside you already knows this isn't random. You felt it before you could explain it. A subtle realignment happened, not with chaos, but with precision. And even though it caught you off guard, it didn't feel destructive. It felt intentional, almost as if something unseen stepped in to guide your steps before you moved too far in the wrong direction. It didn't arrive loudly. There was no dramatic collapse or explosive ending. Instead, it came quietly. A door didn't open the way you expected. A connection shifted without warning. A timeline you trusted no longer aligned. You noticed it in small moments, in pauses that lingered longer than usual. And while you couldn't explain it logically, your spirit recognized it immediately. This wasn't confusion, this wasn't failure, this was intervention. Something adjusted your path without asking, not to harm you, but to protect what was meant for you before you reached a point of no return. That realization can feel unsettling at first. When change happens without your permission, the mind looks for blame. You ask yourself what you did wrong, what you missed, or where you misstepped. But pause here, because this shift did not originate from fear or weakness. You didn't cause this. You didn't sabotage anything. This movement came from beyond your conscious control, and that's what makes it difficult to understand, especially for someone intuitive like you. You usually sense things early, but this moved ahead of your awareness. This wasn't reaction. This was recalibration. When control is removed suddenly, the instinct is to resist, to question, to replay every decision searching for an error. But that instinct is misleading right now. What occurred was not created by doubt or hesitation. It wasn't punishment for a lack of faith. It was a necessary adjustment that couldn't wait for your approval. Some changes cannot be negotiated with logic. They must happen first and be understood later. That's why it feels intrusive. Divine movement doesn't ask politely. It enters, rearranges, and leaves before comfort has a chance to object. Here's what most people never realize. Mercy doesn't always arrive gently. Sometimes mercy interrupts. Sometimes protection feels like disruption before it feels like relief. You were stable enough to stay where you were, but not aligned enough to grow there. Familiarity kept you comfortable, even as it slowly limited you. And that's why the shift had to be subtle and fast. If you had seen it coming, you might have resisted. If you had sensed it forming, you might have tried to control it. But this movement required silence, speed, and precision. That's why nothing exploded, nothing collapsed. Things simply stopped responding the way they used to. What once flowed began to stall. What once felt certain began to feel distant. That wasn't decay, that was design. Something adjusted the trajectory without destroying the structure. And that tells you everything you need to know. This wasn't about tearing your life apart. It was about refining the path ahead. You didn't imagine this. You didn't overthink it. Something truly moved, and it moved because staying still would have cost you more later. But this wasn't just about removing control. It was about creating space. Space for what couldn't enter before. And what comes next only makes sense if this adjustment happened exactly when it did. Certain things were stopped at the threshold of this season, not delayed, not faded. Stopped, as if a boundary was drawn that could not be crossed. You felt it as silence where noise once existed, distance where familiarity lingered, a cycle that suddenly paused without explanation. It felt strange because you expected continuity. But this season refused to carry what didn't belong. This wasn't about taking something from you. It was about preventing something from following you. Some patterns survive only through repetition. Some dynamics thrive because they're allowed to continue unchecked. And if they cross into a new season, they don't just follow, they anchor deeper. That's why the boundary was placed exactly where it was. This wasn't punishment. This was preservation. A quiet act of sealing off what would have slowly eroded what lies ahead. The gate didn't slam shut in anger. It closed with intention. Some people weren't rejected, they were redirected. Some patterns weren't broken, they were intercepted. Some cycles weren't ended dramatically, they were denied access. And that distinction matters. Rejection wounds, but protection preserves. What you're feeling now isn't absence, it's cleanliness. It's the rare feeling of a season that hasn't been touched by what used to drain you. That's why this ending feels different. There's no bitterness, no emotional chaos, just a calm finality. A knowing that something tried to come with you and couldn't. And deep down, you know what it was. A dynamic that demanded too much. A pattern that repeated itself with different faces. A cycle that promised change but delivered delay. It followed you long enough to feel normal, but normal doesn't mean permitted, and permission was revoked, not based on your attachment, but based on your destination. Certain things cannot exist where you're being prepared to go, not because they're wrong, but because they're incompatible. They would have altered the atmosphere, so they were stopped early, quietly, completely. There's relief in that, even if you didn't consciously ask for it. Carrying old weight into a new season always costs more than we expect. What followed you before was not allowed to continue. The door wasn't closed to hurt you. It was sealed to protect what's about to grow, and now the space ahead of you is different, untouched, uncontaminated. But that space isn't meant to remain empty, because when something is blocked, something else is being prepared to enter. And what's approaching required that gate to be sealed first. Disruption often looks like disorder at first. The mind labels unexplained movement as error, but this wasn't randomness. It was precision disguised as interruption. Nothing moved emotionally. Nothing reacted impulsively. This was a surgical adjustment. Divine movement doesn't operate on impulse. It anticipates. It acts before damage becomes visible. That's why this happened when it did. Not earlier, not later. There was a narrow window where this could occur with minimal harm and maximum benefit. And it happened exactly there. Here's the perspective that changes everything. What was removed wasn't the problem. The problem was the space it occupied. Space determines what can reach you next. As long as that space was filled, something aligned had no entry point. You couldn't receive what was coming while holding on to what had already served its purpose. And purpose always has an expiration, even when attachment doesn't. That's why the movement felt sudden. Preparation was already complete. You were ready before you realized it. The only missing piece was clearance. Clearance isn't gradual, it's immediate. One moment the path is blocked, the next it's open. That doesn't mean arrival happens instantly, but it means approach is now possible. And what's approaching doesn't tolerate clutter. It arrives only when the environment is exact. That exactness required disruption. You may call it loss, but nothing of value was destroyed. What moved was repositioned because it no longer aligned. Alignment isn't about comfort, it's about fit, and what no longer fit had to shift so recognition could occur. Most people forget that what's meant to reach you is also moving. It cannot arrive at a destination that hasn't been prepared. And now there is space that didn't exist before. Space that was measured, not accidental. That space isn't waiting, it's being approached. If nothing had moved, what's coming would have passed by, but now the path is clear. The timing is active, and the precision behind this disruption is about to become visible in ways that will make your questions dissolve. This moment carries quiet weight. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't celebrate, it calibrates. The separation already happened. The shift already occurred. Now alignment begins. This is the space between what ended and what hasn't yet revealed itself, and that makes it powerful. Most people rush past this awareness. They chase outcomes too early, but chosen ones sense before they see. They receive meaning before manifestation. That's why you're here now. You're catching clarity before evidence. And that's not coincidence. That's alignment activating early. This isn't a day for noise. It's a day for awareness. Illusions no longer have energy. Expectations have quieted. What remains is truth. And truth doesn't rush. That's why this message isn't for everyone. It's for those who notice subtle shifts and don't dismiss them. Those who understand that absence can be instruction. You're here because your awareness is active enough to receive context before consequence. This is how you're guided, not by proof, but by precision. Not by confirmation, but by clarity. Now comes the part many misunderstand. After sensing the shift, they freeze, but this moment isn't asking you to stop. It's asking you to move differently, not with force, not with hesitation, with alignment, release paired with direction, trust paired with discernment, motion paired with lightness. You don't need to chase. You don't need to fix what moved. You don't need to recreate what ended. Your role is to keep the space open long enough for what fits to arrive naturally. This is where emotional discipline matters. And not suppression, but honesty. Acknowledge what you expected to carry that you no longer are. Feel the uncertainty without calling it loss. Here, uncertainty is openness, and openness is powerful when it's not filled prematurely. Discernment tells you when to move and when to allow movement to come to you. Repeatedly revisiting what shifted creates drag. Feelings are data, not direction. Direction has already been set. Your posture must align with it. Simplify. Clear mental clutter. Say no to what feels heavy, even if it looks logical. Say yes to what feels light, even if it doesn't make sense yet. You are not behind. You are not late. What moved didn't delay you. It cleared timing. Walk forward with less weight. Choose with less fear. The more space you maintain, the smoother the next phase enters. Alignment accelerates when resistance ends, and notice this. Feel how much lighter you are now than when you began. That's confirmation this lightness isn't imagination. It's the result of alignment. Protect it, because what's approaching requires you to be unburdened. It will test whether you truly released or only understood intellectually. This message wasn't meant to inform you, it was meant to activate you. The shift wasn't confusion, the separation wasn't loss, the timing wasn't delay, it was precision unfolding. Nothing was random. Nothing slipped through unnoticed. Every movement carried intention, and every intention carried protection. Nothing meant to walk with you into this next phase was removed. Only what couldn't survive where you're going was stopped. That wasn't subtraction, that was selection, and selection is a sign of trust. You are being prepared for something that requires precision, not excess. From this moment forward, you walk lighter, clearer, steadier. You don't need to explain what shifted. You don't need to justify what left. Permission was granted the moment the path was cleared. Receive this as your confirmation. Peace in your decisions, clarity in your direction. Confidence in your timing. You are not entering this season guessing. You are entering it guided. Honor what moved. Step fully into what's next knowing you are protected, aligned, and carried by intention. If this resonated with you, declare it. I move forward aligned. What moved was never meant to stay. What remains is exactly what will carry you forward.